Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cut Rate Commander, the series in which we take a look at low-price commanders and make budget decks with them. My name is Grazzet, and today we'll be looking at the head of the Riveter's crime family, Ziatora the Incinerator. Before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. And if you're feeling particularly generous, consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description to keep me caffeinated as I work on more of these builds. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see what precon upgrade we'll be covering first from Battle for Baldur's Gate. So with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Ziatora the Incinerator is a 6/6 Demon Dragon with flying that costs 3, a black, a red, and a green with the following ability. At the beginning of our end step, we may sacrifice another creature. When we do, Ziatora deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target, and we create 3 treasure tokens. Taking a closer look at her core stats, Ziatora is sporting a heavyweight CMC, a matching stat block for her cost with built-in evasion, and an ability that effectively lets her fling our creatures not only for free but actually netting us mana as she does so. And while this effect is quite simple at its core, the ability to convert our creatures into targetable removal or burn, even if limited to once each turn, is still quite powerful. Jund, after all, has no shortage of high-power creatures and effects that care about creatures' power, giving us a decent selection of creatures that have naturally high power, or creatures with variable power that can get very high thanks to things that our colors are naturally good at, such as land ramping. This of course leaves our commander with no shortage of high power bodies to fling at our opponent's faces for massive damage or to use as removal as needed, and even ramping us through treasures as she does this to give us even more mana to work with. So as we can see, Ziatora is a power-focused flinging machine, aiming to take huge chunks out of our opponent's life totals by swinging in herself alongside other high-power bodies, then chucking those other bodies at our opponent's faces for even more damage. Which is why this build will be going all in on power, aiming to give Ziatora the biggest ammunition we can so she can deal maximum damage to our opponents. That of course means we'll be running a large variety of high-power creatures, ranging from those that can reanimate themselves to be used over and over again, overstated creatures with downsides that will be flung away before they can hurt us, and creatures whose power scales off our mana base to weaponize the ramp we'll be running to reach our commander as soon as possible. Then, to give us even more access to high-power expendable bodies, we'll be running some token generation sources to help us get even more high-power bodies on board, or create temporary copies of already sacked creatures to give them additional opportunities to be used as fling fodder. And finally, with so many high-powered bodies entering and leaving our battlefield, we'll be running plenty of ways to have them generate card advantage for us as they enter play, means to turn them into draw sources as they die off or we sack them away ourselves, ways to double up on their power to make them even more dangerous as they crack in or get flung, additional means to convert their high power into damage as they enter and leave our battlefield, and finally ways to recur and reanimate them to ensure we can use them over and over again. But enough talk, as Ziatora needs to wrap this up so she can get back to running New Capenna. You see, unlike the other families who waste their time with pointless art, superficial parties, petty espionage, and backhanded politics, Ziatora and her riveters are the ones that built and run this city. It was under her leadership that New Capenna grew to the metropolis it is today. Under her rule that the riveters control the largest stashes of Halo that this city has ever seen. And under her orders that anyone who doesn't know their place gets reduced to cinders. And the rest of the families had best remember that, lest they be taught a very painful lesson by the Demon Dragon of New Capenna. So now that we know a bit more about the commander and playstyle, let's start looking at the deck itself by starting with the creatures. Starting off in the CMC 1 slot, we have its lone entrant with Dragon Master Outcast, a 1/1 that, on our upkeep, creates a 5/5 flying dragon token if we control 6+ lands, making it an early drop that starts pumping out decent-sized evasive bodies as soon as we have enough lands to cast our commander to either swing in with or be sacked for damage and treasure. Moving on to the CMC 2 slot, we have a pair of ramp sources joining us with Sakura Tribelder and Badoka Gardener. Sakura Tribelder is a 1/1 we can sack to put a basic land from our deck into play tapped, making it a staple land ramp source to help grow and fix our mana base while also powering up all our creatures that care about lands in play to make themselves even bigger. Badoka Gardener is a 2/1 that lets us tap it to put a land from our hand into play, and then, if we control 10+ lands, flips into Dokai Weaver of Life, a 3/3 that we can pay for, double green and tap it to create an XX elemental creature token, where X is the number of lands we control. Initially serving as cheap land ramp that later turns into a powerful land payoff that creates 10/10s and above for Ziatora and our other high power payoffs to take advantage of. Then even more ramp joins us as we enter the CMC 3 slot with Topiary Stomper, Burnished Heart, and Fertilid. Topiary Stomper is a 4/4 with Vigilance that, when it ETBs, puts a basic land from our deck into play tapped and is unable to attack or block unless we control 7+ lands, providing us with a decent land ramp source on a sizable body that synergizes well with our large creature payoffs even if it does take a bit to get online. Burnished Heart is a 2/2 that we can pay 3 and sack to put 2 basic lands from our deck into play tapped, making it a serviceable source of land ramp and, by virtue of being on a body, allowing us to reasonably recur, reanimate, or create token copies of it to get even more ramp throughout the course of the game. Fertilid is a 0/0 that comes into play with 2+1/+1 counters and lets us pay 1 a green and remove a counter from it to put a basic land from our deck into play tapped. Again, giving us some very reliable ramp on a body that we can get back through other sources if needed. Sources like the Legend Felden of the Third Path, a 2/3 that lets us pay 2 a red and tap it to create a token copy of a creature in our graveyard, granting it haste and sacking it on the next end step, easily allowing us to get back our utility and high power creatures to be used over and over again for relatively little cost. Then we close out this lot with Rotting Regisaur and Shakedown Heavy, both of which are cheap overstated creatures with downsides, the former being a 7/6 that has us discard a card on our upkeep, and the latter being a 6/4 with Menace that, when it attacks, gives the defending player the option to let us draw a card to untap it and remove it from combat, making them both cheap high power bodies to proc our payoffs then have our commander Fling, though the latter can generate us some decent card advantage if played early enough. Entering the CMC4 slot, we have some more overstated creatures with downsides joining our roster with Demigoth Titan, Demigoth Woe Eater, and Territorial Hellkite. Demigoth Titan is an 11/10 that has a sack a creature whenever it attacks or blocks, dealing a massive 11 damage to the face when chucked by our commander, and its sack on attack or block being occasionally useful when paired up with other death effects or self-reanimating creatures. Demigoth Woe Eater is a 7/6 that, on our upkeep, has a sack a creature and, when it's sacked, has each opponent discard a card while we draw a card and gain 2 life. Again, being a good sack target for our commander and getting us some decent value when it is sacked with its hand attack, draw, and life gain. Territorial Hellkite is a 6/5 hasty flyer that has to attack each turn if able, and, on our combat phase, has us randomly choose a player to attack that it did not attack on the previous turn, tapping itself down if we can't, making it a hefty evasive body that can start piling on the damage as we work our way towards our commander. Then we have some self-reanimating sack fodder up next with Rekindling Phoenix and Ebondeath Draco Lich. Rekindling Phoenix is a 4/3 flyer that, when it dies, creates a 0/1 token that we can sack on our next upkeep to return Rekindling Phoenix back from our grave into play with haste, easily recurring itself for free each turn, as well as being evasive and hasty when it does come back to crack in for even more damage on the turn that it resurrects itself before we fling it away again. Ebondeath is a 5/2 flyer with flash that comes into play tapped and can be cast from our graveyard if another creature other than itself died that turn, giving us another flyer with pseudo haste as we can cast it on our opponent's turns, with a very easy to meet reanimation condition to continually get it back into play to either attack with or use as sack fodder. And we have one more high power creature joining our forces in this slot with Zendikar Incarnate, a star 4 whose power is equal to the number of lands we control, making it a 6 power creature by the time we can cast our commander and only getting bigger from there as we make our land drops and ramp. Moving away from high power creatures and onto more ways to use them, we have Disciple of Bolas and Ruthless Technomancer, both of which have a sack a creature when they ETB, the former being a 2/1 that draws us cards and gains us life equal to the sacked creature's power, and the latter being a 2/4 that creates treasure equal to its power instead, as well as letting us pay 2 a black, tapping it and sacking X artifacts to return target creature card of power X or less from our graveyard back onto the battlefield, each providing our build with additional means to turn our high power creatures into value, in the former's case into card advantage and life gain, and in the latter's case into ramp and eventual reanimation that works well with our commander's treasure generation. Dragonborn Champion will also be joining our ranks, being a 5/3 trampler that, whenever a source we control deals 5 or more damage to a player, draws us a card, working nicely to keep our hands nice and full as our high power creatures crack in and Ziatora throws them at our opponent's faces. Then we close out this slot with the legend Mr. Orfeo the Boulder, a 2/4 that, whenever we attack, doubles target creature's power until the end of the turn, serving as an easy and repeatable means to double up on our creature's already impressive power to have them hit even harder as they swing in or get flung at our opponent's faces. Proceeding to the CMC5 slot, we'll start off with another round of self-reanimating high-power creatures with Thunderblust, Vorapede, and Kuldrotha Phoenix. The first being a 7/2 with haste, persist, and if it has a -1/-1 counter on it, trample. The second being a 5/4 with vigilance, trample, and undying. And the last being a 4/4 hasty flyer that lets us pay 4 on our upkeep to put it back into play from our graveyard if we control 3+ artifacts, all easily coming back into play to be sacked again, the first 2 doing so upon death once, and the last doing so multiple times per game so long as we have the treasures and mana to spend. The Scorpion God then joins us as a self-recurring legend, being a 6/5 that lets us draw a card whenever a creature with a -1/-1 counter on it dies, lets us pay 1 a black and a red to give a -1/-1 counter to another target creature, and when he dies returns to our hand on our next end step, making him an easy to recast threat if removed or sacked, while also being a solid mana sink to turn all our treasures into non-destruction based removal and card advantage. Then we have a trio of massive entrants joining our ranks with Yargle Glutton of Urborg, Clackbridge Troll, and Crash of Rhino Beetles. Yargle is simply a vanilla 9/3. Its enormous power for its cost alone being more than enough to add it to our creature roster to work alongside our power payoffs and our commander. Clackbridge Troll is an 8/8 hasty trampler that, when it ETBs, gives target opponent 3/0/1 go tokens and, at the beginning of combat on our turn, lets any opponent sack a creature to tap it down, draw us a card, and gain 3 life. Making it a huge stat block that either forces our opponents to eat its trample damage or sack a creature to have us draw cards and gain life, either of which we're fine with since we can always lob it at our opponent's faces with our commander if we need the damage. Crash of Rhino Beetles is a 5/5 trampler that, if we control 10+ lands, gains +10/+10, easily turning into a 15/15 trampler thanks to all the land ramp we're running to demolish our opponent's life totals as it swings in or is sacked away by our commander. Garruk's Pack Leader then closes out this slot, being a 4/4 that draws us a card whenever a creature of 3+ power ETBs under our control, serving as a potent source of repeatable card advantage as we cast and reanimate our big creatures while still working to proc our other high power payoffs. Continuing on to the CMC6 slot, we start off with Rubble Hulk and Multana Yavamaya's Avatar, both of whose stats grow depending on our lands. The former stats being equal to the number of lands we have in play and having Blood Rush for 1 a red and a green, giving target attacking creature +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of lands we control, while the latter is a 0/0 that gains +1/+1 for each land we have in play and in our graveyard, as well as letting us pay 1 a green and return 2 lands we control back to our hand to return him from our graveyard back to hand, making them both enormous threats that only get bigger as the game progresses that we can also use to empower our creatures or recur them to be sacked again as a bonus. Then we wrap up this slot with Fido Titan, a 7/2 that, when it dies, returns to our battlefield tapped on our next upkeep, making it the perfect sack target for our commander that domes someone for 7 each turn, then comes right back into play on the following turn to do so again at no mana cost. Nearly at the end now, the CMC7 slot brings us some more Lands Matter creatures with Beanstalk Giant and Molimo Marrow Sorcerer, both of which are stars whose stats are equal to the number of lands we control, the former also having the adventure Fertile Footsteps, a sorcery for 2 and a green that lets us put a basic land from our deck into play, while the latter has Trample, giving us another pair of Lands Matter Titans that either ramp us early or crash through blockers for more damage respectively. Stalking Vengeance then closes out this slot, being a 5/5 with haste that, whenever another creature we control dies, has it deal damage equal to its power to target player, effectively doubling our commander's damage output by having the sacked creature deal its power and damage again when it gets flung, easily putting our opponents into 1 to 2 shot range. And finally, skipping all the way to the CMC12 slot, we have our last creature with Galta Primal Hunger, a 12/12 trampler that costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of all creatures we control, making it a 6 mana 12/12 trampler with only our commander in play and only getting cheaper from there, allowing it to hit the board surprisingly early and crash in for damage before we fling it at an unfortunate opponent for 12. That covers all our creatures, so let's move on to our instance. Starting off in the CMC1 slot, we have Undying Evil, Undying Malice, and Feigned Death, all of which, until end of turn, let us return target creature to the battlefield under its owner's control if it dies, the first doing so by giving the creature Undying, and the latter two returning the creature into play tapped with a +1/+1 counter on it, giving us dirt cheap means to sack our high power creatures again and even making them stronger as they come back, or alternatively a way to protect our commander from removal if necessary. The CMC2 slot then brings us some removal options with Terminate and Infernal Grasp, the former preventing it from regenerating and the latter costing us 2 life to use it, making them both cheap means to deal with any creature-based threats we may encounter. Then we close out this slot with even more removal in the form of Master's Rebuke and Ram Through, both of which have target creature we control deal damage equal to its power to target creature, the former also hitting planeswalkers and the latter dealing any excess damage to the creature's controller if our creature has Trample, giving us some solid removal that takes full advantage of our creature's naturally high power to either deal with multiple threat types or add some additional burn to our removal suite. Our removal suite then continues to expand in the CMC3 slot with Beast Within and Chaos Warp, both of which deal with target permanent, the former by destroying it and giving its owner a 3/3 token to replace it, and the latter by shuffling it back into its owner's deck, then having them reveal the top card from it, allowing them to put it into play for free if it's a permanent. The flexibility they provide by hitting almost any type of threat at instant speed, making them well worth running despite their downsides. Then we close out this slot with Soulfire, which has target creature we control deal damage equal to its power to any target, weaponizing our creature's naturally high power even further by allowing them to convert it into removal or burn before our commander flings them to do it again. Nearing the end now, the CMC4 slot brings us its single entrant with Momentous Fall, which has a sack a creature to draw cards equal to its power and gain life equal to its toughness, giving us an instant speed way to convert our high power creatures into card advantage, which is especially good in response to removal and wipes. And finally, reaching the CMC5 slot, we have our last instant with Return of the Wild Speaker, which lets us choose one of the following effects. Either we draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures we control, or each non-human creature we control gains +3/+3 until end of turn, either serving as an instant speed way to reload our hands, or as a surprise AoE pump effect to get our creatures' already high stats even higher for when they crack in or are sacked by our commander. That covers all our instants, so let's move on to our sorceries. Skipping to the CMC2 slot, we start off with the ramp sources Rampant Growth and Farseek, both of which let us put a land from our deck into play tapped, the former being limited to basics and the latter to any land with a non-forest basic land type, making them cheap land-based ramp and fixing to help us reach our commander faster and powering up all our lands equals power creatures. Life's Legacy then closes out this slot, which has a sack a creature to draw cards equal to its power, giving us yet another way to turn our high power creatures into card advantage whenever we may need it. Then continuing on to the CMC3 slot, we have even more ramp joining us with Cultivate and Kodama's Reach, both of which search our deck for 2 basic lands, putting one into play tapped and the other into our hand. Again, getting more lands out of our deck and into play to speed up and fix our mana base while empowering our lands matter creatures. And finally, we close out this slot in our sorceries with Corpse Explosion, which has us exile a creature from our graveyard to deal damage equal to its power to all creatures and planeswalkers, turning our previously sacked creatures into a cheap board wipe to level the playing field if things start getting out of hand. That covers all our sorceries, so let's move on to our enchantments. We start off in the CMC1 slot with its only entrant, Phyrexian Reclamation, which lets us pay 1 a black and 2 life to return target creature card from our grave back to hand, providing us with a dirt cheap means to recur any creature we may need as well as a mana sink to spend our treasure hoard on to do so. Then skipping to the CMC3 slot, we have Elemental Bond and Garruk's Uprising, both of which draw us a card whenever a creature of a certain power ETBs under our control, the former proccing off 3+ power creatures, and the latter proccing off 4+ power creatures but also drawing us a card if we control a 4+ power creature when it ETBs, and gives all our creatures trample, making them both very easy to trigger sources of card advantage as we cast, create, and reanimate our creatures, with the latter's AoE trample also allowing our high power creatures to crash through blockers to get in for even more damage. Riveter's Ascendancy then closes out this slot, which, once per turn when we sack a creature, lets us return target creature with lesser mana value from our graveyard back into play tapped, effectively tacking on reanimation to all our sack effects to guarantee to get a body back to replace the one we sacked, to ensure our commander always has bodies on hand to fling. Continuing on to the CMC4 slot, we have its 2 entrants with Greater Good and Sarkhan's Unsealing. Greater Good lets us sack a creature to draw cards equal to its power, then discard 3 cards, serving as another instant speed way to turn creatures that would die anyway into card advantage that cares about their high power. Sarkhan's Unsealing, whenever we cast a creature spell of power 4 through 6, deals 4 damage to any target, or, if the creature has 7+ power, deals 4 damage to each opponent, creature, and planeswalker they control instead, adding a decent removal/burn effect to nearly every creature we cast, and eventually being a repeatable one-sided wipe once we start hitting our top ends. Now nearing the end of this category, the CMC5 slot brings us its single entrant with Unnatural Growth, which, at the start of each combat, doubles the power and toughness of each creature we control until end of turn, making our entire board twice as dangerous on both offense, defense, and when being flung by our commander, while its green-heavy casting cost is easily circumvented by our commander's treasure generation. And finally, reaching the CMC6 slot, we have our final enchantment with Warstorm Surge, which, whenever a creature ETBs under our control, has it deal damage to any target equal to its power, giving us yet another way to weaponize our creature's naturally high power by turning it into removal or burn to work alongside our commander. That covers all our enchantments, so let's move on to our artifacts. The CMC1 slot brings us its only entry with Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can pay 2 and sack to put a basic land from our deck into play tapped, making it a cheap source of colorless land ramp that goes a long way to fix our mana in the early game. Then skipping to the CMC3 slot, we have our last 2 artifacts with Mask of Gristlebrand and Mimic Vat. Mask of Gristlebrand is an equipment that equips for 3, gives the equipped creature flying and lifelink, and when the equipped creature dies, lets us pay X life, where X is the equipped creature's power to draw that many cards, making it a solid way to grant our high power creatures evasion and to pad our life totals as they get in for damage, while also being a potent form of card advantage whenever the creature's dealt with or we sack it away. Mimic Vat, whenever a creature dies, gives us the option to exile it and return any other card that was exiled by it to its owner's graveyard, as well as letting us pay 3 and tap it to create a token copy of the exiled creature with haste that's exiled at the end of the turn. Like Felden of the Third Path before it, easily allowing us to make 3 mana copies of our creatures to reuse their abilities or to swing in with and fling them, but also giving us the option to use our opponent's creatures if the opportunity presents itself. That covers all our artifacts, and with no planeswalkers to cover, let's move straight to our land base. Starting with our mana lands, we have Command Tower, which taps for any color in our commander's color identity, Exotic Orchard, which taps for any color an opponent's land would be able to produce, Savage Lands, which comes into play tapped and taps for any of our colors, Cinderglade and Smoldering Marsh, both of which come into play tapped unless we control 2 or more basic lands, tap for 2 of our colors, and have the basic land types of the mana they can produce, Foreboding Ruins and Game Trail, both of which come into play tapped unless we reveal a land of the basic land type of the mana they could produce and tap for 2 of our colors, Mossfire Valley and Shadowblood Ridge, both of which we can pay 1 and tap to generate a red and green or black and red respectively, Temple of Abandon and Temple of Malady, both of which come into play tapped, tap for 2 of our colors and scry 1 when they ETB, and lastly, Blighted Woodland and Myriad Landscape, both of which tap for a colorless and we can tap and sack to put 2 basic lands from our deck into play tapped. The former costing 3 and a green to do this, while the latter only costs 2 but comes into play tapped and is limited to 2 of the same basic land. And finally, we're running 7 swamps, 7 mountains, and 9 forests as our basics to close out our land base. So, now that we've covered all the cards in the deck, let's take a look at this deck's breakdown. This deck currently has 35 creatures including the commander, 12 instants, 6 sorceries, 8 enchantments, 3 artifacts, 0 planeswalkers, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 21 creatures with 4+ power, 4 sources capable of creating 4+ power tokens, 5 cards whose power scales with our lands, 17 cards that care about high power creatures, 13 cards that can recur or reanimate themselves or others, and 2 cards that can repeatedly double up our creature's power, giving us a legion of high-power creatures for Ziatora to sack for maximum damage and treasure generation, plenty of payoffs for them as they come into play, deal damage and die, ways to bring them back to be sacked again, and even a handful of means to double up on their power to make them even more dangerous. For general deck stats, we have 14 ramp sources, 13 card draw sources, 11 targeted removal sources, and 2 board wipes, leaving us with a slightly higher number of draw sources since some of our high-power creatures have it built in, and a more normal ratio of ramp removal and wipes. Looking at our mana curve, we have 6 1-drops, 9 2-drops, 17 3-drops, 13 4-drops, 10 5-drops, 5 6-drops, 3 7-drops, and 1 12-drop, leaving us with a fairly hefty curve that aims to ramp us hard early, dropping high-power creatures ASAP followed by our commander to begin flinging them at our opponent's faces, generating us mana and value as we do so. Currently, this deck is valued at $64.76, not counting the price of basic lands or shipping. This price was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. For side grades, Unleash Fury, Choose Your Weapon, and Exponential Growth are all excellent ways to double up on our creatures' already high power even more. Cauldron of Souls could be considered to give all our creatures on demand persist and keep them alive to be sacked 1 additional time. And Ball Lightning, Groundbreaker, and Lightning Skelemental are all very cheap bodies with high power that our commander can hurl at our opponents before they sack themselves away. For upgrades, Chandra's Ignition is a powerful wipe that leaves our biggest creature alive while leveling everything else and dealing a substantial amount of burn to all our opponents. Malignus can be a 20/20 for only 5 mana, making it theoretically the largest creature we can drop on the board and then hurl at our opponents for half of their life total. Mirren of Clan Niltoth can reanimate bigger and bigger creatures turn after turn to ensure our commander always has big bodies to fling. And Xenagos God of Revels is another power doubler that not only protects himself but also turns into a sizable threat once he comes online. And finally, Mikaeus the Unhallowed makes for a solid if pricey addition to empower all our other creatures, enabling us to sack them twice over the course of their lifetime and bringing them back stronger when we do so, making the cost of digging him up almost worth it. Almost. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. It's only been a week, but thanks to a wellspring of new subscribers, we've been able to blow past the 4.3 and 4.4k milestones, and land squarely at 4.5k subscribers. Sincerely, thank you all for helping the channel reach this point, since we would have never gotten here without all of your support. Moving on to our future videos, we'll start dropping the precon upgrade guides for Battle for Baldur's Gate starting on June 11th, with the first one we're covering being Mind Flayers and its face commander Captain Negathrod. So look forward to a horror tribal graveyard theft focused build featuring him next week. Before we close out, again, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, as this channel cannot grow without your support. And if you feel like showing your thanks by keeping me caffeinated while I make these videos, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank Sahir21 yet again for another generous donation. Thanks for the coffee, Sahir21, and thanks for supporting the channel. And if any of you would like to support the channel in a different way, feel free to check out the other deck techs floating around my head if you'd like to see the latest builds, or click on the link above for a playlist of all the Cut Rate Commander episodes I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.